Sometimes people that watch my videos are a bit hesitant to go on a bike tour of their own. So I sometimes ask them why, and the answer I usually get is that it's either too difficult or too expensive. So that's why I decided to do a series this fall to show you that bike touring doesn't have to be either difficult or expensive to get you started bike touring right away. I'm going to talk about those things that you need to make that leap to go on that first bike tour. It's easy to fall into that trap thinking that you need to buy a bunch of unnecessary stuff, when in fact you probably have most of the things you need to go on that bike tour already at home. So in this first video I'm going to talk about how to convert your old mountain bike or commuter bike into a perfectly decent touring bike with just a few steps. So basically what we're trying to accomplish in this video is to turn this into this. But first a little bit about myself. My name is Michael and I run the YouTube channel Bike Touring Mike. I've been touring for the last 7 years or so, and for the first 4 of those I did my touring on this old hybrid commuter bike standing behind me here. It worked out fine for me then and there. It had a few good things going for it. It had a long chainstay and also a lot of eyelets that made me able to mount racks and panniers onto it pretty easily. So that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Rather than go out and buy a touring bike right away when you start bike touring, you can just look at the bike you already own, make a couple of simple adjustments to it and use that as your first touring bike. With that said, it's not about what bike you have. Instead, it's all about what possibilities that bike can offer for you. Remember in the beginning of the video when I talked about not being lured into buying a lot of unnecessary stuff? Well, there is actually 3 things that I think you should invest in to be able to turn your old bike into a touring bike. And the first of those is to buy a decent rack. And you can pick up one of these for about $30. But when you do so, make sure to check what the maximum weight of that rack is. As you can see that this rack is maximum load of 25 kilos, which is about 55 pounds. So it's important to buy a sturdy rack that's able to withstand all the pressures from the gear that you're loading onto the rack. So in order to be able to mount racks onto your bike, you have to check if your bike has these small eyelets or rack mounts on the frame. And these are usually located right below the seat and also around the dropouts. Most bikes have these, but if you don't have them, there are still ways to work around this problem. And if you want to install front racks as well, it's a big advantage if your fork has these eyelets as well. But if you have an older bike or a bike with suspension forks, chances are that you don't have these eyelets. But there are still a way to work around this problem as well. I myself have a front rack called XLC Lowriders, and these are universal to all forks. So instead of mounting directly onto the fork, these have a U-ring that sort of wraps around the fork instead. So you can still use suspension forks if your bike has one of those. The second thing I recommend you to invest in is a pair of decent tires. We've all been there standing on the side of the road trying to change our flat tires. And believe me, doing this on a bike tour is no fun at all, since you have to remove all of your panniers from the bike in order to change the flat tire. So instead of standing there changing a flat tire, why not just enjoy the nice landscape around you? I myself have been touring with Schwalbe Marathon Plus tires for the last 5 years or so, and I still haven't had one single flat tire on those years. So I can really recommend these tires. And it's really important to have a nice sturdy tire when you're on a bike tour, since all of that gear that you're loading on top of the bike creates even more pressure onto the tire. And the third and final investment that I'm gonna recommend you to do is to get a nice saddle for your bike. This is by far one of the questions that I get asked about most times. When I tell people that I'm bike touring, they usually ask me, how are you able to stay on that saddle for a whole day? Now I know. You must have one of those super comfy gel saddles, right? And I usually tell them, no, quite the opposite. I actually have a really stiff saddle made of leather called Brooks. So Brooks is kind of the go-to saddle among bike tourists. It molds itself after your anatomy, so after you've been riding it for a while, it sort of creates a perfect fit between you and the saddle. With that said, since it's made of leather, it isn't for everyone. But there are still a lot of nice saddles out there, so I really recommend you to do your research upon getting a new saddle. And if you're really lucky, you might have a local bike shop that has a saddle library, so you're able to test out a couple of saddles before purchasing one. And when you've finally decided on a saddle, make sure to try that saddle out a couple of times before going on that first bike tour. So after having listened to these 3 simple steps on how to convert your old bike into a touring bike, and maybe you have already been out on a few short bike tours already and think like, maybe this bike touring thing is actually kind of fun and you're ready to make that investment into a proper touring bike. I also have a lot of tips on this topic as well. And that is actually the second video in this series. And it's sort of a continuation of this video as well. So if you click the link up in the corner, I'll see you in the next video. And until then, have a good one.